All right, the House Oversight Committee joining the Treasury Department in investigating claims that Minnesota tax dollars were sent to a terror-based group in Somalia. And even the Washington Post is calling out Governor Tim Walz for his role in the scandal. Quote, the governor is not helping himself by refusing to take responsibility for the welfare fraud that happened in plain sight during the pandemic. Fox News contributor and George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley joins us now. Professor Turley, when I look at this story, I see quotes from the defense team here that's defending some of these individuals. No one was doing anything about the red flags. And so how does this happen? Going back to 2022, there were prosecutions for this scheme, and we're just now learning about it?
Yeah, Kayleigh, it's baffling. And to have Governor Walz say, well, I don't deal with abstractions, there's nothing abstract about this. In a short period of time, the number of autism centers increased by 700%. The amount of funding increased by 3,000%. I mean, these people were virtually taking the furniture out of the governor's mansion. And the most that Walz can say is that, well, we're a prosperous and generous state. Well, that's not going to cut it. This is not your money. And anyone who looks at those numbers, and this point was made by the Washington Post, could not help but say, wow, there is an amazing amount of fraud occurring in my state. So it's as you noted, this is belated, but it's really needed. I mean, we have to be able to hold people like Walz to account. If you burn $1 billion through sheer negligence, just blind recklessness, then there's got to be some accounting. You've got to appear and answer for these questions.
So do you think Walz will actually have to appear before the House Oversight Committee?
I think he might. And, you know, without any question, he and his administration are going to have to answer some questions. And he's going to have to do better than he did over the weekend. I mean, he basically offered a shrug and a smile. Well, there's $1 billion missing on the table, and someone's going to have to answer for it.
Yeah, taxpayer dollars potentially to terrorists. It's crazy. There's also this story, Professor Turley. There's a judge who blocked ICE from making warrantless arrests in D.C. without a flight risk proof. And that comes as California is launching a new online portal to report misconduct by the feds. You know, I want to start with the first one. This is what Judge Beryl Howe ruled. Defendant's systemic failure to apply the probable cause standard, including the failure to consider escape risk, directly violates the clear statutory requirements under the INA, that's the Immigration and Nationality Act, and DHS's implementing regulations. Is this merited? It seems like it puts handcuffs on ICE.
It does put handcuffs on ICE, and this really captures the problem that they're facing. The Biden administration opened up the southern border and let millions of people through. And people like Mayorkas said, well, we're doing everything we can. We now know that was a lie because the Trump administration shut down the southern border within weeks using the same authority Mayorkas and Biden had. But once these millions were in the country, you have many in Congress that said, well, we don't want to make it any easier to remove them. And so what ICE is looking at and what the administration is looking at are, you know, millions of people that they would now be required to get individual warrants for. And that would just reduce this to a slow crawl when they're trying to gain some ground back of what was lost during the Biden administration. Really, the Supreme Court's going to have to look at these standards. The administration is saying we should only have to show reasonable suspicion that someone's in this country illegally, and we believe these people are flight risks. This judge has good faith reasons why she said, you know, I think the law says to the contrary. The question is, where is Congress? Where's Congress to say we've got a crisis? The previous administration allowed millions of people unvetted into this country, and we have to take the system and reform it so we can move greater numbers for deportation.
You're right. Congress would be a great assist in this. And where are they? We can continue to ask that.
In Minnesota, you have a big Somali population. And after some investigations, the Manhattan Institute, these two guys who were with that organization, last month they investigated Minnesota's Medicaid Housing Stabilization Services program. It's called Feeding Our Futures. They also investigated other organizations to find out where tax dollars are going. They found out that, is it $1 billion? It's $1 billion, I believe, going to Somalia. And that is going to a terrorist organization, Al-Shabaab, which is a military group in Somalia, and it's an al-Qaeda-linked terrorist organization. Why are tax dollars, if you live in Minnesota, you're going to work, you're working really hard, some of your paycheck is going to benefit, according to this investigation, a terrorist organization.
Including the pandemic aid.
That's exactly
right. So the pandemic aid, this governor not only allowed the riots to go crazy with George Floyd, when the money came flooding in, he had no idea where it was going. When whistleblowers stood up and said, this is fraudulent, this is fake, this money's going to the wrong people, he went after the whistleblowers. That's the investigation. Now, the Justice Department announced new charges last week against a 78th defendant in the Feeding Our Future fraud scheme, which prosecutors say involved more than $250 million in stolen funds alone on our federally funded child nutrition program has already resulted in over 50 convictions.
So the governor had an opportunity to address this, and you would think that he would take the criticism and say, you know, I made a mistake. You know, he was on the campaign trail talking about that's what leaders do when he was running for vice president. But when he was pressed on it, he had this to say.
Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems. And I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated, but that attracts criminals. Those people are going to jail. We're doing everything we can. But to demonize an entire community on the actions of a few, it's lazy. But that's Donald Trump. Deflect, demonize, come up with no solutions. He's not going to help fix anything on fraud.
It's not that anyone's trying to demonize that group, Somalis. We're just saying, how did you let it get this far?
Yeah.
$1 billion of taxpayer dollars? Who was in charge of that money? Why was it sent to another country? Why is it benefiting a terrorist organization? You have answers, and you have taxpayers. You have constituents who want to have some answers.
Well, it's also not generosity, it's stupidity when you're giving money to terrorists. Tom Emmer is also from that state. This is what he had to say earlier on the show.
You've got housing fraud, you've got daycare fraud, you've got 80 autism centers under investigation, all of this under Tim Walz's watch. And his response? God bless President Trump for actually saying something about this and calling it out. Al-Shabaab controls all the financial infrastructure in Somalia. This money has gone back to Somalia. Ergo, common sense would tell you that millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars from Minnesotans, has gone to terrorists known as Al-Shabaab in Somalia. This is an awful situation. Tim Walz should be held accountable, and somebody in his administration, I'm just going to leave you with this, over $1 billion, Lawrence, you can't tell me that that's just negligent oversight. Someone is complicit.
I agree. There's something here. The investigation, I hope, is just beginning. I want those whistleblowers, the ones who were prosecuted.